Good evening, everyone. Welcome and happy Wednesday to you. I hope that you are staying well and that you and your family are making room for Jesus to be born again in your hearts at Christmas. Thank you for joining me tonight for this teaching. And this is part 3 in a short series that Monique and I have been doing through the book of Amos.
Hi, that's all holy. Hope you're making room for Jesus in your heart to be born again. Yes, I'm going to get there, y'all. That's awesome. I love that. I'm going to take that. I like that a lot.
That's just from Lessons and Carols, the Anglican liturgy.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. So Amos, the book of Amos, we've been going through this. Gotten a lot of good feedback about the series. People seem to be enjoying it. And we've been enjoying doing this the last couple of Wednesdays. Do you remember like the old time Wednesday night Bible study? Did you ever go to Wednesday night Bible study when you were a kid?
Yeah. It was like a way to get out of the house.
Yeah, your grandma ever dragged you Wednesday night Bible study?
No. Okay, so no, our church did Wednesday night Bible study, but that was the youth night.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, it's been a while. Yeah, that was youth night. So we would do Club EM, and it was like 200 kids.
Oh, wow.
Just living their best life.
That's right.
In youth group while the adults were doing
whatever it is that they do.
Yeah. Something not fun.
Something not fun. Something like studying the scriptures. I don't know. Yeah. But so Amos is a very popular book that is often used by social justice oriented Christians. It was a book that Monique used to quote to me from time to time. And I would say things.
I never quoted Amos.
Yeah, you did a few times. Yeah. And so anyways, we'll just give her a moment to get in reality. So we're doing this short series and we're trying to do two things. One is to model for you how to interpret a prophetic book of the Bible and talk about some principles of Bible interpretation, as well as zeroing in on the book of Amos itself, and along the way, trying to give some consideration to justice themes that are in the book and trying to help put them into their proper context. And in the first 2 episodes we spent extensive time in the first episode talking about the background of the book of Amos. So we won't be re-rehearsing that tonight. And we've worked our way so far through chapters 1 to 6. So tonight we hope to finish out the book and go through the kind of the third major movement of the book in chapters 7 to 9. So I want to invite you to add your voice to the conversation. You can engage with us on the chat box. On YouTube is the easiest way. You can ask clarifying questions there. And we will take periodic breaks throughout the conversation, read through those comments and respond to the ones that seem relevant. Glad to see some of our friends hopping on there tonight. And good. Hopefully Laura can stay and be a moderator, because I forgot to ask anybody to be a moderator tonight. So, oopsies. So be sure to see, Linda understands Wednesday night family dinner, and then all the families split into their own studies. This is how it was for us too. Good. Laura's going to step in. I see Amy there. That's fantastic.
Comment on Facebook.
Okay, great. Oh, Virginie. Hello and welcome. What a beautiful way to state the meaning of Christmas. So thank you. Wish I could take credit. It's just a line from the Lessons and Carols liturgy. So if all the people who are Anglican maybe have heard it. I don't know. So this is your audience participation part of the broadcast. Be sure to hit the thumbs up wherever you are. If you're on Facebook or YouTube, share the show, invite others to watch the stream with you or catch the replay, and make sure that you are subscribed and that you've hit that notification bell, and you might actually receive a notification from YouTube when I post new content. So be sure to do that. All right. For those people who are new to my channel, I just always like to give a little explanation and context of my approach. This is a channel that is dedicated to proclaiming the historic Christian faith as it was taught and preserved by the ancient church, and to explore how we can respond to what's happening in our culture today through the lens of the historic Christian worldview. And so this is not the channel where we do magic tricks with the Bible to make it fit what our culture is telling us to do. We look to the scriptures first to shape our thoughts and our feelings, our opinions. And we use the early church as sort of a check or boundary or guardrails, as I like to call them, to help keep us from wandering from the true faith. So with all of that said, let's get into this. Now, last time we looked at chapters 3 to 6. So it was 4 chapters. It was a very thick portion of the book. That was kind of the second major chunk of the book. And so it was a lot. You were saying earlier before we went on the air, you're like, boy, it seemed like we did a lot last time. I said, yeah, well, it's because I was kind of trying to do it in chunks. So we looked at God's case against Israel and a lot of the evidence that he was kind of bringing into the courtroom, putting together his evidentiary trail of how they had violated their covenant relationship. And so the big picture behind everything that we're doing in Amos right now is the covenant, and that God's people have broken their end of the covenant agreement, covenant relationship. And now they are receiving the curses that were promised to them in Deuteronomy 28. So if you really want to understand the context of Amos or any of the prophets, you got to, except for Jonah, which is he's a prophet to Gentiles, you have to kind of understand it through the lens of the covenant relationship in those first books of the Bible. So justice is a big theme we saw last week. We're going to continue to see that tonight. It's a big part of the problem in God's people not acting according to justice. But we also always want to define what we mean by justice. We don't want to just immediately jump to what our culture is telling us what justice is. Where do we look?
In the word. That's where we get our definitions first there.
Yeah.
And, if a word isn't there, like racism, we want to make sure that we are definitely looking at principles to be able to define these things.
So if we're talking about justice, one of the best places to start is in the law.
Yeah.
Looking in Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy. But then we see a lot of carryover and repetition
in the New Testament.
Yes. So we have to keep all of these things sort of hanging together and understand their proper relationship. So on that note, I had a viewer write into me this week, Andy. So I want to give
Andy Allen.
Yes. Yeah. So I want to give Andy a big shout out for watching the series. He's been enjoying it and sent me this screen cap from the NIV Study Bible.
Okay.
And I thought it was interesting. He had an interesting observation. If you look under theme and message, then this is kind of the intro to the book of Amos. And I think this was the 2000 edition of the notes. It says the dominant theme clearly stated in 524, which calls for social justice as the indispensable expression of true piety. Amos was a vigorous spokesman for God's justice and righteousness. He condemns all who make themselves powerful or rich at the expense of others. And I'm wondering what you think about that statement in light of what we've covered so far. How accurate do you think that is? I have some thoughts about it, but I want to hear yours first.
I do have some thoughts. Well, I'm not a big fan of the term social justice. I get why people use it, but not a big fan of that. That's what sticks out to me first.
Because it has a lot of baggage behind it.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. Like I get it when you're trying to have conversations with people in culture and things like that. But to me, it just it's
not a biblical term per se.
But I do get why people use it.
Yeah.
And then as indispensable expression of true piety, dominant theme. Okay, so social justice. I forgot to say. So I think that there are truths there, like that God is telling the nation of Israel, like, hey, you didn't uphold the covenant relationship, and you didn't uphold the covenant relationship with me, one, and then you didn't uphold the covenant relationship with each other, two. So within your own group, and then looking at people from the outside who didn't uphold, they didn't have the covenant relationship, but they did understand the way that you should be treating some people.
Oh, the nations.
The nations, yes.
Yeah, in chapters 1 and 2. Yeah.
So
okay.
looking at that, like, how do we treat one another? I would say those things fall under justice and righteousness. My relationship with one another, and we get the foundation for how we should treat one another through the law.
Right.
So I see that, and I see, him saying like, well, Amos is a spokesperson for these things. I actually think that God is calling people back to remember that. Can we go back to that picture really quick? Thank you. So I see it, but there's something about it too that is like, I don't know that he's making himself a spokesperson for God's justice and righteousness, or is it that he's calling these people out because they haven't upheld the covenant, their responsibility? I think, to me, those are a little different. And then he condemns all who make themselves powerful or rich at the expense of others. And I don't know, like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
What does it really mean? Because you could say that if I'm an employer, I became rich, so to speak, at the expense of my employees. Well, I don't know that that's an accurate term or an accurate way to think about it. That's not necessarily
an injustice.
Yeah. Because I could be giving them health benefits, paying them a decent wage, caring for their families. Like, we can be doing all these things, and yet I still am the benefactor of a greater percentage of wealth or income than what they are. But that doesn't mean that they're not taken care of. It doesn't mean that I'm acting unjustly with them. And it's kind of like in Luke 16, there's this story of, and you know this because I read it to you, there's this story of the unjust unjust shrewd manager.
The shrewd manager.
Yeah, the shrewd manager in Luke 16, 1-13. And that guy is collecting commission, or there's something that he's doing. He's not like, I would take in, like, looking at commentaries and things like that. He's not necessarily poor or, not doing too well, but he's not the master either.
Yeah.
And so I don't know that by God's definition or standard that if I am taking care of those who are under me, like we have principles in the law to do, that it's wrong that I, become wealthy or whatever. Yeah. And I mean, there's all kind of laws that say how you should take care of your employees. So I don't know. Those are some of my thoughts.
Yeah. And
right off the
she's
top
doing this as a kind of a cold read here. Let's go back to it. So this is good. I guess when I read this, I immediately had kind of an aversion to the term social justice. It surprised me that this went all the way back to 2000. So this is 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. This term was being used. I don't think as many people were aware of all of the academic baggage behind that word 20 years ago. But I mean, if we want to say that justice, let's just scratch out the word social. If justice is an expression of true piety, I could kind of get on board with that. I mean, it's an expression. Yeah. I don't know if it's
an indispensable
expression. I mean, there's other expressions of true piety, such as true worship and repentance of sin. Mm-hmm. And, there's a lot of other things that are important too. I think kind of the word that came to me when I read this is that it's a highly truncated description of Amos. It's sort of just focused on the social issues. And as we've been seeing, there's much more to what's happening in Amos. It's about covenant enforcement and, the kind of the legal going to court, if you will, and the evidence. And we're going to look at today the verdict and the punishments, but going to the sentencing phase.
I think this is what happens too with a lot of social justice people. They do take a section and then say, see, all of Amos is about this, or all of Micah is about this.
It's about justice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When not understanding that for Micah and for Amos, you need to look back at the law. You need to look back at the covenant and God's relationship with Israel to be able to understand what's really happening here.
But this is the problem with just using the word justice and then jumping right into our modern cultural context. That's not helpful. And it really distorts what's happening here, which is covenant enforcement. So let's get into, let's go to the comments. Is there anything that we need to see there? And then,
hey, that's me. Drew. Must be Andy.
Hey, that's me. Oh, cool. Awesome.
No social justice reference at all. I think that there should be a distinguishing.
So yeah, he says that the NLT Study Bible, the summary talks more about calling the northern and southern kingdoms about their false piety. See, I think that's much closer to the big idea of Amos. And then justice is kind of one of the evidences when they go to court, but the big problem is your fake worship, and that sort of thing. So, okay, well, let's get into chapters 7, 8, and 9. I found this little chart from Insight for Living, better than the janky chart that I had last week. So, thanks to...
Wasn't janky.
It was pretty janky. Chuck Swindoll's ministry. And so this is a good kind of visual summary of the major movements of the text. So the first week, we kind of went through chapters 1 and 2. Last week, we focused on chapters 3 to 6, that meaty part in the middle. And tonight, we're finishing up with chapters 7 to 9. And so we can see kind of what's coming here in this movement. And this is a great time to remind our friends the importance of reading a book over and over again so that you get those major movements.
Yeah.
You've had to outline enough passages now.
I was going to say, I just did a report like this.
Yeah.
I did it on Jonah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, but you have to get that sense of the author's movement of what are the big pieces, and doing something like that or creating an old-fashioned outline style. That's how you really begin to make friends with the text.
Yeah.
You have to take that discipline, because then you can go in the deep dive of, well, what does this little section mean? This section in the middle of 5 verses or 1 verse. But if you don't have that big scope first, then you don't know how this section fits into it. So, okay.
I agree.
All right, let's pick it up here at chapter 7. Verse 1 marks a major turning point in the book. Now, God is going to start detailing the punishments. The verdict's been handed down. Now we're kind of moving into the sentencing phase. And he does this through a series of visions and telling what the judgments are going to be. This is what the sovereign Lord showed me. He was preparing swarms of locusts after the king's share had been harvested, and just as the late crops were coming. And when they had stripped the land clean, I cried out, "Sovereign Lord, forgive. How can Jacob survive? He is so small." So the Lord relented. "This will not happen," the Lord said. So in that first vision, Amos sees these locusts coming at the harvest, decimating their food supply. And Amos is basically pleading with God, remember your covenant. And he mentions Jacob there. And if we remember in Genesis, the 3 great fathers of our faith, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Jacob was the father of the 12 tribes. So by saying Jacob, it's a shorthand way of saying your people. Remember your people. Don't forget your covenants. And then God relents. And then he shows them a second vision right after this. Go right back there. This is what the sovereign Lord showed me. The sovereign Lord was calling for judgment by fire. It dried up the great deep and devoured the land. So it dried up the water and the land. I cried out, "Sovereign Lord, I beg you, stop. How can Jacob survive? He is so small." And so the Lord relented. This will not happen either. Then he shows him a third vision. This is what he showed me. The Lord was standing by a wall that had been built true to plumb, with a plumb line in his hand. And the Lord asked me, "What do you see, Amos?" "A plumb line," I replied. Then the Lord said, "Look, I am setting a plumb line among my people Israel. I will spare them no longer. The high places of Isaac will be destroyed. The sanctuaries of Israel will be ruined. With my sword, I will rise against the house of Jeroboam." So it's specifically dealing with the north, the house of Jeroboam.
They are the ones who set up the false worship.
Yes. And so again, we have to keep that passage in Kings in mind of what happened with Jeroboam, the sin of these worship centers that he set up in Dan and Bethel.
I think that's important. It's important because of something that you said a couple weeks ago, where if we aren't familiar with what happened in Kings, the rest of it won't make sense.
We won't know what's happening in
It'll
this.
just be, well, the sins of this person or the sins of that person. But we have to understand what happened, because then I think that sets up, it sets up the rest of the Old Testament, but then it even sets up things that, like, how we live today. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, just wanted to highlight that.
So I have a question for you. Here's a pop quiz.
Goodness gracious, I can't even.
School ended yesterday, so now I can just tease her a little bit more. She's a little better mood. What is a plumb line?
I don't know. I was going to ask that same question. I don't know what a plumb line is.
Well, I anticipated this. I have a little picture.
Oh, goodness.
So here's a plumb line. So a plumb line is a weight at the end of a string. And it's a thing that's often used by masons or other builders to make sure that a wall is straight. And it's a building tool to help make sure you have straight walls, because what's going to happen if you have crooked walls?
Your pictures will tilt.
Your house is going to fall down for sure. Oh. Yeah. You can't build a structure with crooked walls. That's not going to work. So,
you would be surprised. I have seen many structures with crooked walls. I'm just going to put that out there.
But they're not very sound. And those are usually the first to fall in an earthquake. So, yeah.
Well, there's that.
That's out of plumb. So what do you think God is saying here? If we could go back to the Amos a minute, with the section about the plumb line. What do you think God is saying when he says that he's going to use this? He's setting a plumb line among my people. I will spare them no longer. What do you think he's saying there with that?
Maybe that he's setting like a, not a weight or a measure, but like a way to tell if they are standing straight. Mm-hmm. Are they within the way that I've set for them? So if all the things are here, are you lined up against this wall, or are you way over there? Some of you here, like, where are you at? I don't know.
Yeah.
Checks and balance.
So what would that plumb line be? Like, what would be that? Because measure is exactly the word I had in my notes. If he's going to use a measure to see how straight and strong and true his people are, and to judge them for being crooked or bad, what would be that measure?
I would say the law or his covenant with them.
Yeah. So that plumb line is basically a way of saying you're crooked. Mm-hmm. You're not living up to loving God and loving your neighbor.
And we know
the
that.
10 Commandments.
Because
basically.
we have it written down. I told you what to do.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a mystery. Yeah. It's not a speculation. Mm-hmm. It's not hazy. It's not vague. You look right in the Mosaic covenant. Mm-hmm. They know exactly what they're to do. At the end of Deuteronomy, it says these things are not too hard for you to do. And if you do them, these are the blessings that I will send. And if you don't do them, these are the curses that I will send. Okay, let's continue reading here. Verses 10, we'll pick it up there. This is an interesting passage here. Then Amaziah. Now, I want you to notice what's happening. The priest of Bethel, okay, that's an important place, sent a message to Jeroboam, king of Israel. Amos is raising a conspiracy against you in the very heart of Israel. The land cannot bear all his words. For this is what Amos is saying. Jeroboam will die by the sword, and Israel will surely go into exile away from their native land. Then Amaziah said to Amos, "Get out, you seer." In other words, seer is another word for prophet. "Go back to the land of Judah. Earn your bread there and do your prophesying there." So go back to the south. Get out of our kingdom in the north, in Israel. Don't prophesy at Bethel, because this is the king's sanctuary and the temple of the kingdom. Amos answered Amaziah, "I was neither a prophet nor the son of a prophet." So we talked about that the first week. Amos doesn't graduate from the big prophetic ministry school. He was a shepherd and running a vineyard, minding his own business, and then God calls him into the prophetic ministry. I was a shepherd and I was taking care of sycamore fig trees. But the Lord took me from tending the flock and said to me, "Go prophesy to my people Israel." Now then, hear the word of the Lord. You say, do not prophesy against Israel. Stop preaching against the descendants of Isaac. Therefore, this is what the Lord says. Ooh, this is tough. Your wife will become a prostitute in the city, and your sons and daughters will fall by the sword. Your land will be measured, divided up. You yourselves will die in a pagan country, and Israel will surely go into exile away from their native land. So now the verdict is coming down. Here's what's going to happen to you.
Here's my question. Who is the wife in this?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, let's work our way through it. So let's go back to verse 10 now that we've read the whole thing. Let's kind of break it apart a little bit. So Amaziah, the priest of Bethel, sent a message to Jeroboam, king of Israel. Okay, so why
you really think Amaziah, who might have been related to Amazon, you think that he was really a priest, or was he a fake priest because he was in the fake worship center?
Exactly. Yeah, so if he had been appointed back in Kings by Jeroboam, and he was in that line of fake priests.
Yes.
Is he a real priest? No, he's some kind of cardboard cutout priest.
Yeah.
He's not a real priest. He doesn't have the real credentials. He doesn't have the right genealogy. Now, what's the significance of Bethel again?
Bethel is a false worship center.
Yeah.
And it was created out of, one, Jeroboam's desire to keep all the people in the north because they might want to go to the south and stay.
Yeah.
And
so
because
let's
of
put
the
up
distance.
the map if we can. Yeah. Perfect. So you're starting to get the, kind of get the jam here, because through this passage, he's telling Amos, go back to Judah. We don't want you up here in Israel. So Bethel, you can see, if you see Jerusalem there kind of in the middle, then Bethel is straight up from that. And you see that little border? You see that little dotted line?
I'm so lost. I don't know where we are.
Bob, can you?
I can't do a cursor.
You can't do a cursor. Okay, so see Jerusalem where it's a star?
Yes.
And then straight up.
Oh, yes. And then there's
and
Bethel.
then Bethel. And then Samaria is a star above that. That's the capital of Israel.
Yes.
Jerusalem's the capital of Judah. So he's telling him, this priest in Bethel, who's this worship center, this fake priest at a fake worship center, is telling God's prophet, go back to Judah, go back to the south. We don't want you here, right? So again, geography is playing an important role here in Amos. So let's go back to chapter 7. Poor Bob. All my shenanigans here. Doing this electronically. All right. So now I love this part. Amos is raising a conspiracy against you in the heart of Israel. I mean, what is this clown trying to do here to Amos?
Get him in trouble.
Yeah. Get him in trouble. And then Amos just isn't having it. I mean, he's not intimidated. He's not backing down. He's not nervous. He's not scared. He just lets them know what's going to happen. They try to get rid of him. They try to banish him. All right, let's scroll down. And then we see the threats. Don't prophesy. Don't preach. Stop it. It kind of reminds me of Peter and John before the Sanhedrin in Acts chapter 3. And they tell him, stop preaching in this name. And it's like, they weren't having it. And then Amos just repeats, all right, here's what's going to happen. Your land's going to be divided up. Your sons and daughters are going to die. You're going to be taken away. You're going to die in a pagan land. So let's go to your question now. Your wife will become a prostitute in the city. What are your thoughts about that?
I don't have any. I'm trying to figure out who's the wife.
That's a very good question.
Like, I can see who the sons and daughters could be. Depending upon which tribes were in the north and which tribes were in the south. Okay, but who's the wife?
Well, it could be literal wives in telling them your wives will be carried away.
Yeah, that's true. I was thinking more along the lines of like symbolically.
I think in the context, given that everything else in the context is fairly straightforward, I think it's talking about literal wives. And that was actually a form of warfare that the Assyrians did engage in. So it was a way of breaking down and exploiting both the men and the women in control.
Hide your wife, hide your kids.
Yeah.
That's a mess.
All right, let's go to the chat and kind of check in. Is there anything there?
Don't have anything. Facebook is good.
All right. Can you find that chart online? Yeah, just go search for chart on the book of Amos from Insight for Living.
Yeah, here's on Facebook. Somebody found it.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, it's from Swindoll. Hopefully he'll have grace toward me. Yeah, plumb line, the standard by which you measure against. Exactly. So good. Glad you guys are following along. Yeah, just feel free to put your questions in the chat or, you know, I love reading your comments and that you're engaged with the text. Okay, let's go on to chapter 8. So we had a couple of visions. We had the vision of the fire, the locust, the plumb line. Now we have another vision. This is what the sovereign Lord showed me. A basket of ripe fruit. What do you see, Amos? He asked. A basket of ripe fruit, I answered. Then the Lord said to me, the time is ripe for my people Israel. I will spare them no longer. In that day, declares the sovereign Lord, the songs in the temple will turn to wailing.
Wow.
Many, many bodies flung everywhere. Silence. Can we scroll down a little bit?
Sorry.
There it is. Hear this, you who trample the needy and do away with the poor of the land, saying, all right, I'm going to stop there at verse 4. All right, let's just look at the first 3 verses if we could scroll up. So this basket of ripe fruit, it's like if you have ripe fruit, that means you got to eat it.
Or it's going to go down.
It's going to, it's going to be rotten fruit.
Like an avocado.
So it's kind of like, all right, this is the moment. This is coming. My mind is made up. There's no more hope of repentance or changing. But look at this word picture. Many, many bodies flung everywhere. That's a pretty graphic picture of what is ahead for them in terms of judgment. So, all right, let's keep reading in the second half of verse 5 there. So let's look at what are the specific justice issues that come up. When will the new moon be over that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath be ended that we may market wheat? Skimping on the measure, boosting the price, cheating with dishonest scales, buying the poor with silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. It's the second time that image has come up in the book. Selling even the sweepings with the wheat. So what are some of the injustices that God is specifically mentioning here?
Well, there's the dishonest scales.
Yep.
There's taking advantage.
Yep.
Of the poor and the needy.
Yeah.
Even like selling things that aren't necessarily for selling.
Yeah.
You know, like you don't sell the sweepings of the wheat. It's kind of like when you collected the harvest, you didn't collect the things that you dropped or that were at the edges.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah. So again, this takes us right back to the law. There's a wide assumption that these people know enough scripture that they know exactly what's being talked about. And this idea of dishonest scales is a very big issue in scripture, that you don't cheat the poor.
Yes.
You don't, and that's the real issue, is cheating the poor. And you don't inflate prices to gouge the poor. That's the injustice. And you don't do things that unnecessarily disadvantage the poor. Now, that's not to say that that some form of capitalism is the problem. Buying and selling goods is not the problem. It's when you have two sets of prices.
Yes.
You know, and you're gouging people and you're selling things that aren't of good quality, or you're watering down
doing things intentionally to keep people down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the problem. And so these statements, we saw a lot of these themes in the readings that we did last week. And in fact, I wanted to go back to chapter 5, if we could, for a minute. There were a few verses that we just kind of glossed over last week, and I wanted to revisit them because they're really kind of the core of the book now that we're starting to wind things down. And reminding us that there's a combination of sins here. It's not just exploiting the poor. It's a suite of sins. He says, I I despise your religious festivals. All right, so this is a worship problem. Your assemblies are a stench to me. Your burnt offerings, your grain offerings, I will not accept them. Away with the noise of your songs. I don't want your worship. I don't want your music. But let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never failing stream. And that was kind of the where I got the title for this series of Let Justice Roll Down. It's from chapter 5, verse 24. And I think you and I would resonate with that. Like, yes, we want our hearts to align with God's heart.
Yes.
And that we fight for justice the same way that God fights for justice. But we need to define that carefully.
Yeah.
And so when we're thinking about conversations with justice-oriented Christians, often when they come to the book of Amos, this is the core verse that they'll quote to you, or the verse about selling the poor for sandals. You know, those are kind of their two favorite verses. And they'll say, oh, see, the main problem is here, justice. But I want us to understand, to keep everything in context of what's going on here.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that, yeah, justice is it's an issue. And I think it's clear in the scriptures. But the issue even more so is the relationship. It's the relationship. They're out of covenant relationship with a very holy God.
Yeah.
And
that's the primary
problem.
Yeah.
You can't address justice if you are not addressing your relationship with a holy God. Because how do you know what justice is? How do you define it? Where are you looking? Like, what's your plumb line to know that you're doing justice?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that justice is a huge problem, and that's clear. And yet what is the bigger problem is that they've lost sight of righteousness, of personal righteousness, of righteousness as a nation, of what it means to worship a holy God and worship him correctly.
So when people talk about justice, or they say, you know, let justice roll down like a river, one of the first questions we need to ask is for specifics. What are we talking about? Because God is super specific about what justice looks like.
Yeah.
Justice can't just be an idea, a theory. It can't just be a policy. It has to look like something. And it has to resemble what we see in Scripture.
And, you know, even if it has a semblance of Scripture or of what we see in Scripture, we also have to remember it's kind of like if you're making a cake. You can have all the ingredients of a cake, but then as soon as you pour something else in it, it's not a cake anymore. So you can't say, well, look, I have all these ingredients and I'm just going to take a little bit of ketchup, you know, or a little bit of mustard, and you're going to get something that's not cake. And it's the same thing when we look at things like justice. I have within Scripture a very clear ingredient list of what justice is. These are the things that go into justice.
Yeah.
And when I decide to go into culture and take a little bit of something from culture and bring that in, there you go. You've lost it.
Yeah.
We have to remember that God calls us to think specifically and not just, you know, oh yeah, I have this and now let me willy-nilly throw in a little bit of this and a little bit of that because I think that I can make it a little bit better.
Yeah.
We don't get to play God in that.
That's so good. I like the cake analogy because God tells us very specific rules. And when you're making a cake, you got to have the right ingredients and the right quantities and measured the right way and mixed in the right order, put in the oven in the right way. You got to follow the instructions. It can't just be willy-nilly and, you know, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I think it's a really important thing to keep in mind.
Thank you. I'll be here all week. Go ahead, seminary. Go ahead.
All right, let's go back to start up in verse 9 here.
Chapter 9?
No, chapter 8, verse 9.
Chapter 8, verse 9. Okay. Whoa. Sorry.
That's okay. There we go. All right, let's scroll down to verse 8. There we go. So let's go to verse 9. I think, in that day, declares the sovereign Lord, I will make the sun go down at night at noon and darken the earth in broad daylight. I mean, this is his way of saying, like, judgment is coming. Things are going to get bad. I will turn your religious festivals into mourning, all your singing into weeping. I will make all of you wear sackcloth and shave your heads. I will make that time of mourning for an only son and end the end of it like a bitter day. I mean, and again, God is not against worship. I hear so many people take these statements in Amos and say, see, God doesn't really care about sacrifices. He doesn't like all this formalism. That's not what this is saying. You have to understand.
Y'all is formal the wrong way.
Exactly. You
no.
can't set up fake worship centers with fake priests and fake holidays and fake sacrifices and think God's going to be like, man, it's close enough. That's all right.
Yeah.
You know, just you do you. That's cool.
No.
And that's not how that works. The problem here is the fake worship. Mm-hmm. It's not that God's against the ceremonies. He set up the ceremonies in the law. So I hear so many social justice oriented people, though, they'll take these snippets from Amos and they'll say, see, God doesn't like all this formalism. He's against it. I'm like, you're not reading it closely.
I was in social justice for a while. I haven't heard that. I actually hear that from progressives.
Progressives, yes.
Progressives.
That would probably be more accurate. Yeah. Okay, and then we get to verse 14 here toward the end of the chapter. He wraps it up with those who swear by the sin of Samaria. So we have to ask ourselves, what is the sin of Samaria he's talking about? Who say, as surely as your God lives, Dan. Okay, that's another key place. As surely as the God of Beersheba lives, they will fall, never to rise again. And once Israel goes into captivity, they never get restored to the land. Mm-hmm. And is a dire situation for them, a permanent punishment. If we could go back to the map really quick, if that's a possibility. So we see Samaria there, the capital. It has a star right under the word Israel. So it was the capital of Israel. And Dan, we don't see on this map, but it's way at the top. It's at the northernmost border of Israel. Bethel was in the south, and those were kind of the two markers of the kingdom of Israel. That was where these alternative worship centers were, the fake worship centers. So, okay, is there anything on comments that we need to?
I don't see anything on. Nope, not there.
Nothing on Facebook.
No, we're good.
Okay.
Cynthia just asked a question. Hi, Cynthia. Wasn't the problem with the worship the fact that there was idolatry mixed into it? I think that's part of it, but the original problem, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I know you will. The original problem was that they set up, they were fake, like they had been given instruction to go to the temple to worship.
Right.
And instead of going to the temple to worship, they set up these more convenient worship centers. And then as they were, and in setting those up, then they set up convenient like altars and convenient ways of worship and all of those things, and then later they brought in the idols and all of those like other gods. Yeah,
so it's a little confusing in the text because they do set up these golden calves, much like that happened back in the book of Exodus. But if you read in the Hebrew very carefully, what it says in both places in the beginning was, this is the God who brought you up out of Egypt. And so the idea in the beginning is that they were, and I think this is the problem in Exodus too, is not that they were worshiping the incorrect God. They were trying to worship Yahweh, the correct God, incorrectly. Mm-hmm. God did not want to be worshiped through graven images. That was the violation of the second commandment. And so the question is which commandment was being violated here? Is it the first commandment of you shall have no other gods before me? Or is it the second commandment, you shall have no graven images that you used to worship me with? So I think, and most Old Testament scholars would take the position that the problem in Exodus and the problem in Kings 12 is that they set up in the beginning, they set up these golden calves to violate the second commandment, not the first commandment. But it quickly slid into full-on Baal worship because they already had the graven image of that in place. And then they set up the Asherah poles and all of these high places and all other forms of idolatrous worship that were violations of the first commandment. But in the beginning, what Jeroboam was trying to do was still worship Yahweh, the correct God, but violating the second commandment
no graven images.
by using graven images to do it. So hopefully that helps, Cynthia. The experts that I have talked to over the years about this issue who can read Hebrew and are more conversant with that say that that is the thrust of what the text is wanting us to know. So does that help answer her question? Does she give any
say.
All right, cool. All right. So yes, eventually the idolatry did get mixed into it, but not in the beginning. Okay.
Can you read my question above? Susie, hello. Isn't that what Jesus got upset with with in the temple when he overturns the tables?
I'm not sure I know what that's referring to. Okay.
Here, I can look and see. Suzanne, I'm not sure what.
Yeah, I'm not sure I got enough context to know.
I think she was asking something specifically at a point that we were at.
Okay.
And we've gone past it.
Yeah.
Can you just maybe put a reference to what we were talking about so it kind of like jogs our memory?
And I'll check back in the comments a little later after we do the next section here. So, all right, let's go into chapter 9. All right. I saw the Lord standing by the altar, and he said, strike the tops of the pillars so that the thresholds shake. Bring them down on the heads of all the people. Those who are left, I will kill with the sword. Ugh, this is so graphic. No one will get away. None will escape. Though they dig down to the depths below, from there my hand will take them. Though they climb to the heavens above, from there I will bring them down. Though they hide themselves at the top of Mount Carmel, I will hunt them down and seize them. Though they hide from my eyes at the bottom of the sea, there I will command the serpent to bite them. Though they are driven into exile by their enemies, there I will command the sword to slay them. I will keep my eye on them for harm and not for good. This doesn't really sound like the God of the progressives of God's all love and no judgment. So he's basically saying, okay, now here's the sentencing. They're in the sentencing phase of here's all the punishments that is gonna come down. It's a life sentence. You're never gonna come back. It's basically a capital crime, if you will, and your nation is done.
Yeah.
It's finished. Let's can you scroll down a little bit here? I'm gonna go to verse 7. This is a really critical verse. Are you not Israelites, the same to me as the Cushites? Did I not bring up Israel from Egypt, the Philistines from Caphtor, and the Arameans from Ker? Okay, now I want you to look at this first part of verse 7. Are not you Israelites the same to me as Cushites? What do you think the Lord's saying there to them? This is very important.
The Cush were not
Who are the Cushites?
They were Gentiles.
They were Gentiles.
So
do you know where they lived?
Maybe the land of Cush.
Do you know where that is? East Africa.
Okay.
So these are like below Egypt. They're Gentiles, and the Cushites are mentioned many times in Scripture, especially in the Old Testament. But what is God saying to Israel? Like, what is his relationship with them?
I feel like this is a pop quiz, y'all.
Yeah, it is.
I feel uncomfortable.
Well, so can you put it back up there so she can see it?
Okay, so I think that maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's saying I don't have relationship with you.
Yeah. He's saying I'm going to regard you in the same relationship that I have with these Gentiles. Mm-hmm. That's who you are to me. Mm-hmm. It's Like sometimes we like to watch Shark Tank. And there's one of the personalities on there, he's fond of saying, "You're dead to me."
Yeah.
That means it's like, I don't have a relationship with you. I don't acknowledge you. That's kind of what God's saying to them, is that, look, our covenant is over. If we were to think about it as a marriage relationship, we're getting divorced. You are no longer a spouse to me. You are no longer connected to me. We don't have this relationship anymore. So when you get divorced from somebody, you're severing that legal relationship.
Yeah.
And that person is no longer your spouse. And you remove the symbolism, you have paperwork, and it's over. And in fact, in Malachi, I believe there's a section where God talks about divorcing his people and giving them a certificate of divorce, and that they don't have a relationship anymore. And he's saying, you're on the same level as all of these other pagan nations. And so it's like, if you divorce your wife, if a husband divorces his wife, then he regards his ex-wife it has the same relationship with her as he would have with any other woman.
Yeah.
So this is a very important statement, that there is no longer any special relationship. There is no covenant. They are far from his covenant. Okay.
Here's a question, and I don't know if
we're at a good break here.
Kim says, what's the history behind the Cushites being named versus the other Gentile nations?
Well, Amos, God condemned a number of Gentile nations at the beginning of the book. The Edomites, I'm trying to remember some of the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Philistines. And so the Cushites were a people, I was just reading about them. I'm reading a book right now. It's called like A Biblical Theology of Race and Ethnicity. And there was a whole chapter in the book about the Cushites and all the places that they're mentioned in the scriptures. And there are many mentions of them, actually, but Cush is mentioned in Genesis chapter 2 as being part of the Garden of Eden, but it's probably like Eastern Africa, Northeastern Africa, up in there. Probably darker skinned people than the Egyptians.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know if that answers her question, but
Susanna put her question in here again. She said, when Jesus got upset with the money changers and desecrating the temple in Matthew 21, is it similar to the way they worshipped in Amos?
I don't think so. I think it is a hard passage to understand, but most scholars seem to think that what's happening with Jesus in that situation is that they had set up those tables in the area where the Gentiles were able to come to the temple.
In Matthew.
In Matthew. Yeah. And so what they were effectively doing was keeping people out that God had made a space for. Now, Gentiles couldn't come all the way inside the temple courtyard to offer sacrifices, but there was a temple, there was an area of the temple where Gentiles could come, and it was sort of a foreshadowing of the new covenant where there would be a wider invitation to the Gentiles. And so many New Testament scholars seem to think that what's happening there is they're blocking the Gentiles from even being able to come into the temple at all. And then they're also exploiting the poor with this whole money changing scheme. So there was a couple of different things happening there.
Okay.
So,
well, thank you
all
for
right.
that.
Got more questions.
All right, more questions. Okay, Jeff has a good comment. The righteous branch of Jeremiah 23, he will reign as king and act wisely and do justice and righteousness in the land. Yeah, and so we see in Jesus the perfect judge.
Yeah.
And we see the perfect embodiment of righteousness and how the covenant is to be lived out. In that sense, Jesus is almost like the living plumb line. He's the plumb line that we that is the true standard bearer.
I think Jeff actually put that comment, or no, maybe it was Linda. I think Linda put that comment on Facebook. Maybe, yeah, something like. Oh no, Linda's comment was plumb line, the standard by which you measure against. I thought I saw someone say that Jesus was the true plumb line.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Cool. All right, let's wrap it up here. We got one final movement, and that is the word of hope. We've had all of this.
Ooh, I'm glad we get into some hopeful moments. This was a mess.
We've had all this judgment, condemnation, guilty sentences. All right, so let's go back to chapter 9, and we're going to scroll down here to verse 11 and following. So in that day, this is the hopeful part of the book. I will restore David's fallen shelter. I will repair its broken walls and restore its ruins, and will rebuild it as it used to be, so that they may possess the remnant of Edom, and the nations will bear my name, declares the Lord, who will do these things. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when the reaper will be overtaken by the plowman, the planter will be the one treading grapes, the new wine will drip from the mountains and flow over all the hills, and I will bring my people Israel back from exile. They will rebuild the ruined cities and live in them. They will plant vineyards and drink wine. They will make gardens and eat their fruit. And I will plant Israel in their own land, never again to be uprooted from the land I have given them, says the Lord. So the question here is, well, what is this? This is a picture of God bringing abundance, which is, kind of the fulfillment of the blessings in Deuteronomy 28, that there's going to be kind of this restoration and this hope. And in general, this is seen as being fulfilled with Jesus and the coming of the Messiah, and that there is this future hope of the true Israel, which ends up being all those who believe in Jesus as their Messiah, that they become the true Israel in obeying him, and that through him we have abundance. We have that life eternal, which is what Israel pointed forward to. It is the foreshadowing of what will really come to fruition in the new creation. And so there is hope that even though all of these bad things happen to the northern kingdom, there is a kind of redemption that happens through Jesus. And those Jews that do get scattered over the empire, as the gospel goes out, and those Jews are living in the diaspora, their descendants will have the opportunity to once again come near to God through the covenant, and as the gospel goes out. So that's kind of the hopeful ending, that God will repair his people, and that from that remnant will come the Messiah. And he, even though it's going to get bad, it's going to get really bad, God will not abandon the covenant promises he made to Abraham and to David, and a Messiah will come and he will reign with true righteousness and justice. So that is the book of Amos.
Well, there it is.
Yes.
I'm glad it didn't end like on that last note with your wife gonna be a prostitute. 'Cause
that was rough.
You think? Can you imagine what the wife is thinking?
Yeah.
Like, that'd be a mess.
All right, well, let's look at the comments one more time. Thanks for explaining. This is a mess.
Yes.
Thank God for hope in the midst of judgment. That's for sure.
Yes.
Well, I hope you guys have enjoyed our little jaunt through Amos. And what has it helped you?
I think it does. It is about justice. Like, it has some justice parts to it.
Yeah,
we should be giving a lot of thought to doing justice.
Does Amos teach things about justice?
Yes, but we have to be thinking about that in light of our covenant relationship
Yeah.
with God and with one another, and not just, this one verse says I need to
let justice roll down.
Justice roll down, and so now I got to go and do all these other things. No, wait, hold on. First of all,
Yeah.
Let's really look at what the scripture's saying. So,
And if we were to summarize what the law is, what that covenant relationship is, the best summary is the 10 Commandments. The first 4 commandments tell us how to love God, and the last 6 tell us how to love our neighbor. So those are not nebulous ideas. Those are not just emotions or ideas that we can fill in any kind of way we want. They have direct connection. They have specificity. And God is so specific about how to live those things out. And so you take one command like, you shall not steal, and then that's like an umbrella command. And then under that is the weights and measures issue that we talked about, this form of stealing.
Yeah.
Do not lie. Well, that's an umbrella issue. And then under that, there's a ton of laws about slander.
Yeah.
And different kinds of lying that you can't engage in. So understand that when we're talking about justice, you have to ask for specifics, because that's what the Bible does. It is highly, highly specific. So God is outlining his case in the book of Amos, his case against Israel, because they have broken his commandments. They broke the commandments against the worship, and they broke the commandments against loving their neighbor. So is Amos a book about social justice in the sense that our culture is calling for? Is it advocating for some kind of Robin Hood theology of robbing from the poor or robbing from the rich to give to the poor? No, it's not. It is a call to being faithful and to understanding our relationship and how we order our lives as a result of and out of gratitude for what God has done for us and the relationship that we have with him.
They coming for you in the comments, though.
Oh, okay.
So, Andy Allen, I want to say that on Facebook it's Andy Allen, but on here it says Drew Allen, but
Okay.
Okay, so the comment is, let's please do another book soon. This was awesome. But then here come Kim offering some secondary praise, talking about, I agree, girl. They coming for you. You're going to be doing, yes. What book you doing next? What book would you guys like to work
so when you say
through?
they're coming for me, I thought they were ripping me apart.
Oh, no, they coming for you to get some more teaching on a Wednesday night.
Oh.
Yes. Appreciate this. I need to go back to catch the first 2 installments. Yet, NutriCoach. I wonder if that's Rihanna. But yeah, I'm telling you that, girl. You better go ahead. What book? I was thinking you should do Leviticus.
Oh no,
personally.
Heavenly Days. No.
Well, okay. Let me explain why before you just shoot down my idea. When we talk,
do the whole book of Psalms next week. Goodbye, Andre.
See,
log off.
when we look at the law and we want to talk about doing justice and things like that, I think Leviticus is a really strong book, and that tells us like this is what justice is.
Well, I have thought about
like
doing
Exodus, Leviticus. Those are like if you want to do justice, these are the books for you.
I have thought about doing a series on the 10 Commandments. It's just, it would take me so long to write it. I'm struggling. I have thought about going through the catechism, because we did that as a family, and that was like a good framework, and going through the catechism and picking selected questions and then doing some of the scriptures in there and doing that as a series on justice, on loving God, loving your neighbor. I have thought about that. I don't know if I have time to write all of that.
I say no.
Oh, I thought
Jeff
that
was feeling me on Leviticus and the holiness codes. Come on through.
I thought that was a pretty good little idea.
No.
She just shot me down. All right. Okay.
Susanna, you didn't like my idea? Girl, I thought Leviticus was fire. See, I'm just gonna go ahead. I don't have to teach it, so there's that.
All right.
But you should be thinking about it.
Yeah, I'll think about it. All right. Well, thank you for spending your part of your evening with us, your Wednesday night. Please share this broadcast with a friend. Make sure that you hit the thumbs up, like it. Make sure that you're subscribed to my channel. And hit that notifications bell so you'll get an alert, theoretically, allegedly, from YouTube whenever I upload new content.
Okay, so I brought this up, I think, the first time we did it.
Okay.
Explain, because you're on the Center for Biblical Unity channel too.
Yeah.
That they should go to to your Facebook page and
Oh,
actually
sure.
like the Theology Mom Facebook page. If you are not acquainted with the Theology Mom Facebook page and you're watching on Center for Biblical Unity, because we're partners, we will stream each other's things. But please go to Theology Mom Facebook page and like it, and then share that page out too and help raise the analytics.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it's been helpful to you and gives you some more of a framework for how to understand a prophetic book, how to understand the book of Amos, how to do some basic Bible study, read in chunks, get the big themes, use maps, and understand kind of the background of the prophets, learning about the law and the sin of Jeroboam. These are all very important things to kind of have in your toolkit as you're interpreting the Old Testament. So thank you so much for joining us, and God bless and good night.
Good night.